Good evening, everybody. As always, we're so happy to have you here tonight. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and on behalf of Jews United for Democracy and Justice and Community Advocates, Inc., I welcome you to tonight's America at a Crossroads virtual town hall program. Thanks to our leadership, former Congressman Mel Levine, former Supervisor Xavier Slavsky, David Lehrer, Caroline Kelly, Rabbi Ken Chazen, and to all of our co-sponsors. Tonight, we are very honored to welcome an amazing trio of top university and college leaders to help us understand the complicated climate on America's campuses. UCLA's Chancellor Jean Bloch, Pomona College President G. Gabrielle Starr, and President of the Association of American Universities, Barbara Snyder, all in conversation with the wonderful Warren Olney. We thank you, all four of you, for being here with us tonight. Next week, we are pleased to present two of the smartest pundits around to talk to us about politics in 2022. With the midterm elections right around the corner and lots of important state, federal, and local races to be decided this year, the perspectives of the great Bill Kristol and Ron Brownstein will be fascinating and illuminating. The following week, on February 23rd, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author, The Atlantic's Bart Gellman, will be our guest. On December 6th last year, some of you may remember, Gellman had a critically acclaimed article, Trump's Next Coup Has Already Begun, Why January 6th Was Just a Warm-Up. With Madeline Brand as our host, Gellman will share his theory about Trump's post-2021 insurrection plans to control America. Full unedited recordings of all of our programs can be found on our YouTube channel and on our website. An easy-to-use link is provided in every email that David or I send. Be sure not to unsubscribe from our emails, because then you won't get the Zoom links, and then you'll email me and ask me to send them to you, which I'm pleased to do, but I'd prefer you not unsubscribing because it makes it a lot easier for you and for us. Many of you ask for referrals to vetted organizations working on nonpartisan democracy issues. Be sure to look at the activism section of the Judge website. That's www.jewsunitedfordemocracy.org, excuse me, for links to lots of organizations directly engaged in fighting for voting rights and for our democracy. There are many terrific volunteer opportunities and lots of organizations doing great work. Now, please welcome my amazing partner, David Lehrer, who will tell you about a couple more programs we have upcoming.
Thank you, Janice. If it's Wednesday, it must be America at Crossroads. Here we are again with another impressive lineup of guests who are leaders in their field, and a tough field it is. It should be a fascinating hour. In 3 weeks, we will have a compelling program on a subject that gets more attention with each day that is close to the midterms, the administration of our elections. Two of the leading practitioners of protecting voting rights and their party's interests, but not at the price of fairness, will be with us. The former counsel of the Republican National Committee, Ben Ginsberg, and President Obama's White House counsel and former general counsel to the Democratic National Committee, Bob Bauer. Their subject, safeguarding free and fair elections. The following week, we will have a discussion on a contentious topic that may be touched upon tonight, but it certainly will be headlining the news as it comes before the United States Supreme Court, affirmative action. Professor Rick Sander of UCLA Law School, the author of the seminal study Mismatch, will debate the future of affirmative action with KPCC's Larry Mantle moderating the debate. And this afternoon, we secured a very special guest for what should be an enlightening discussion, especially because of the tensions in the Ukraine, Admiral Mike Mullen, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He joined us last July and has agreed for a review of what has happened in the world over the past 7 months, from Afghanistan to Ukraine to NATO's rebirth. Tonight's program will be introduced by a Southern California political icon, a decades-long public servant on both the Los Angeles City Council and the LA County Board of Supervisors, and now a professor at UCLA, Xavier Slavsky. He'll be introducing his boss, UCLA's chancellor, and our four other guests this evening. Zev?
Well, thank you very much, David, and thank you, Janice and Mel, and especially thank you to our guests who have joined us this evening, and to our moderator. I'm going to get right to the introduction because we have really some great people and great subjects to cover. So first, let me introduce Jean Bloch, who's been the chancellor at UCLA since 2007. And he's led the campus through unprecedented periods of growth, both in its endowment and in its physical plant and its academic prowess. UCLA is today known by U.S. News and World Report as the #1 public university in the country. And we are very proud of that. Among other things, he's my boss, and he's one of the principal reasons I came back to UCLA to teach after I retired from public service. And lastly, and I hope I'm not violating any privacy rules, Chancellor Bloch and his wife, Carol, are regular viewers of America at a Crossroads, and we're very honored that you're part of our audience. Gabrielle Starr became Pomona College's 10th president in 2017. And she has continued the college's success as one of the top liberal arts institutions in the country. Prior to coming to Pomona, she was the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at NYU. And we are honored to have her here. A number of us have some kind of connections, either through family or co-workers who have attended Pomona College, one of the prides of Los Angeles County. And finally, Barbara Snyder, who heads the Association of American Universities, the umbrella body for America's 66 top research universities. She formerly was the president of Case Western Reserve University, and we are honored to have her here tonight as well, speaking to us from UC Irvine tonight. Our moderator is no stranger to us. Warren Olney is a much honored broadcaster, winning over 40 awards, including Emmys, Golden Mics, and twice as Journalist of the Year. He hosts the To the Point podcast and its companion, To the Point, climate change update affiliated with KCRW. He's been an icon in radio and television in Los Angeles for decades. So Warren, I'm going to turn it over to you and our guests.
Professor, Mr. Supervisor, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be interviewed, and this is a great opportunity to talk to people who are coming at higher education from such very different perspectives. A small liberal arts college, a gigantic urban campus, and an association of many organizations. Let me start, if I may, by asking you all to answer the same question. Relatively briefly, if you can, because I know you could go on for the entire hour about it, but you have all had to deal with COVID. How has it changed your way of doing business? And to what extent do you think the changes that you've had to make are going to become permanent? And Chancellor Bloch, let me begin with you.
Thank you, Warren, and thank you. It's a really a pleasure to be here tonight. So just briefly, you know, in March of 2020, I mean, we switched over roughly in a few weeks from offering all of our classes, or nearly all of our classes in person, to about 3,000 classes being offered remotely, and classes and sections. So an extraordinary change in our educational technology base. I would say it was imperfect when it started, lots of problems. It got better and better. And I think our students, kudos to them, they adjusted fairly quickly to what is really a more challenging, in any way challenging environment. And our faculty also developed the skills. So it has been something that has been successful, but it also, I think, showed the underlying disparities because of the digital divide. So I taught a small class, and I found some of the students sitting in front of rather, beautiful furniture, and others in their car. One student in their car actually picking up free Wi-Fi for their class. So right away, it became very clear that remote education really does amplify the socioeconomic differences of our students. And if we want to use this technology going forward, and very briefly, we will, I mean, this will become more part of our toolkit, educational toolkit, we're going to have to help close the digital divide. We simply have to provide better bandwidth and better access to all of our students. Our employees also started working remotely, and throughout the entire US, I think this is true. Many employees now see this as a desirable lifestyle, working from home. In LA, as we all know, you can be commuting 2 hours in each direction to work. This is just a vast improvement, obviously, in the quality of some people's lives. So we have to think going forward, there'll be some permanent change in the way we do work. We'll have to accommodate to that as well. So I would say those are two changes. We've also recognized that remote education can be very helpful, not just to our students when we have to switch to this technology, but also for our alumni. And we have a lot of digital content now. And I think we now have ways to actually, we have 500,000, I think, living alumni, to connect our alumni better to campus and make it much more of a sort of an educational family. So I'd say the permanent changes will be that remote education will be part of our sort of toolkit of providing educational opportunities. Remote work for many, either partly remote during the week, fully remote for others, is here to stay, and we'll have to adjust to that. And I'd say those are two changes I see that are probably going to be persisting.
Gene Bloch, again, the Chancellor of UCLA. Gabrielle Starr, President of Pomona College. Lovely to have you on our program. Let me ask you the same question.
Thanks very much, Warren, and thank you for having me on. You know, I would say that the biggest thing is that it strained everyone, right? It strained us all differently. And Jean was talking about that a little bit. Faculty, students, and staff in particular who have families for whom they're caring, especially women, were hit very hard in their ability to engage. I know I have had two small kids at home, as well as my mother. And that I was running on the second floor of our house, a college, middle school, an elementary school, and an elder care facility. And I wasn't the only one. Those repercussions are still being felt. There's strains on our governance in terms of the speed in which decisions were made. And I think that some good will come of that in terms of our really understanding how we have to communicate with each other. I think that there's been a lot of emphasis put on our pedagogy, which is wonderful, and ways that we can meet our students where they are. I too taught a small class last spring, and it was really, I hadn't thought about pedagogy in such ways for years, and I've been teaching most of my life at this point. Again, amongst the other disparities that we've noticed, there's the fact of lost learning. So we have students in high schools, elementary schools, middle schools around this country who have missed out. They disappeared during this. When I talked to folks in LA County who are in secondary education, they didn't know where their students were, much less get them to apply to college. 20% of underrepresented minority, low-income and first-year students disappeared from the college pool. That is going to be a real challenge for us to recuperate those individuals, find them, get them back into classes and back on track. And with lost learning, I have a colleague named Tahira Andrabi who's demonstrated that 1 year of lost learning in disasters, earthquakes, COVID, translates to 2 to 3 years of catch-up time. So we are going to be in a hole in this country for a very long time. But I'm hopeful because one of the things that when Jean said it took us 2 weeks to do these pivots, faster than our governments could respond. Every single college and university in the United States of America turned on a dime. We knew what the facts were. We knew what had to happen, and without exception, we all moved. When we know that there is something that's urgent for us, that goes down to our mission of our students, their well-being, the production of knowledge, we'll do it. And so I think there's hope.
Barbara Snyder, President of the Association of American Universities. We've just heard that every institution in the country turned on a dime. Do you agree with that? And do you share the views that we've heard from our other guests?
I do. I am so proud of the way our campuses, not just our members, but all over the country, moved so quickly to remote learning. And this required a lot. Some of our faculty members at our different campuses were pretty prepared for that, but some, let me just say, were not. And they got ready really fast, thanks to a lot of help. Our campuses had tech people who were there to support those faculty members. They also were able to support students too, in ways that the public schools, some of them probably were not as able to do. They were sending out hotspots to students who they knew did not have good internet access, either because of geography or resources. Sending out computers and iPads and things like that to students who had no other ways to connect. So lots of things were done to make it possible for students to continue in school. And I do agree that we've learned a lot of lessons and that we will take some of the positive aspects of this and be able to do things with them over the long term. But I also want to point out that we learned another lesson too, and that's about the value of face-to-face education in the classroom, being on campus. One of the things I can tell you is that the minute our campuses reopened, students wanted to come back. They all wanted to come back, sometimes in numbers that were hard for the campuses to accommodate in the fall of 2020, as campuses began to open, although we were still doing a lot of social distancing pre-vaccine, so it was really hard, and trying to keep residency rates in dormitories at a lower rate because of social distancing requirements. Students couldn't wait to get back on campus. And I think it's because they understand the value of a residential education too. So online learning can do a lot of things, but it is not a substitute. And I think that's nowhere more true than in the K through 12 system as well. And you heard President Starr talk about the lost learning that happened, especially for younger kids, and what we're going to be dealing with in that regard. I also want to point out another impact that hasn't directly been mentioned, and that's the mental health challenges that have arisen from all of this, the quarantining, the isolation, the being away from things that you normally were a big part of your life. And that has different effects on different people, but all of our campuses had to engage a lot more in providing mental health support for not just students, but also faculty and staff too, who were all hit by this. So we don't know the long-term impact, but I will say that I feel gratified to know that students wanted to be back on campus. And I hope it makes our faculty and staff feel good too.
If I could just add one more comment, because President Snyder is actually at UC Irvine right now. There is a faculty group that's been looking at the impact of remote learning. And it turns out, unfortunately, although initially it looked like students did quite well when they switched to a remote format, over time they deteriorate their performance. That is, again, just emphasizing what the other guests have said, that it's no substitute for in-person instruction.
Let me ask you all, but let me go first to President Starr about a phrase that's being used a lot and kicked around a lot, and that's cancel culture. I went online, I saw an article in a student paper at Pomona College by a young woman who said that she had just arrived there from one of the community colleges, and that all of a sudden everybody was getting canceled. Friends were dropping like flies. He made a classist remark. She slipped up on somebody's pronouns. They didn't open the door for a person of color. Canceled, all of them. What is cancel culture? How do you define it? And to what extent does it infect not just your campus, but others as well?
So I can't define cancel culture, Warren, sadly. And that's because I think their cancel culture only is operative for people who feel that they're being unfairly singled out. So people who feel that they are righteously engaging in community and enforcing community standards don't think that there's such a thing as cancel culture. They think there's such a thing as justice. And then we argue about means and ends. I will tell you, every time I hear people say things that I find outrageous, sometimes I really just want to turn off the television, close my door, put some cucumber slices on my eyes, and then never think about them again. But
let me interrupt you for a moment. What about those people who are fearful that they will be subject to cancel culture? They may not want to cancel anybody, but you're, in addition to being a scholar of English literature, you're also a neuroscientist. Maybe you have some insight as a result of that.
So I'll say what we've got is a good old fashioned case of bullying in this regard, and that people come together and when they think that they're in the right, they pound on people who are they believe to be in the wrong. One of the problems with constantly being afraid that you're saying the wrong thing is that that's hugely taxing on us. And so the frontal regions of our brain, those that do emotional processing and emotional cognition, they get pretty tired quickly. You make more poor decisions when you're constantly under stress, and you're actually much more likely to make a mistake. There was a great experiment at Dartmouth College a few years ago where individuals who had biases toward others were much more likely to say the wrong thing when they were aware of their biases and constantly trying to repress them. The challenge is that while there are some people who are very powerful who end up canceled. The biggest effects tend to be on those who have the least power, those who come from socioeconomic backgrounds where they don't know the right words to say. They haven't learned how to be around other people. And it's our responsibility as teachers and as individuals on college campuses to make room for everyone to make mistakes. That doesn't mean some mistakes aren't costly, but we have to try not to exact the highest price. And we have to remind our students that what is most effective in making change in the world is not attacking your enemies. It's about dealing with the actors, promoting the good actions, the right actions, the kinds of things that you want to happen in the world, rather than taking the route of demonizing everyone who's around you. It just doesn't work.
Chancellor Bloch, different subject, and that's affirmative action. California has been dealing with it for a long period of time. The voters of California twice now have said that they don't want to have affirmative action. You have an enormous student body. You want to not just increase it, but also diversify it. How do you do that? And to what extent are you concerned that you may be affected by the decision of the US Supreme Court in one or another of the cases? It would be the North Carolina case, I guess, rather than the Harvard case. It would affect UCLA. But how could it affect UCLA? And are you concerned that your ability to provide diversity and a diverse student body is going to be impaired?
So, as you mentioned, in 1996, when the voters passed Proposition 209, that prohibited the use of race in admissions at our universities and public universities. And we lost a lot of diversity initially because of that decision. And over a decade, there was a steady reduction in the diversity of what was a very diverse student body. We've been able to recover, and we've been able to recover in part through a very aggressive recruitment strategy. We've been able to recover in part because we're in a big city, we're a highly visible university with I think, an excellent reputation. And we switched our admission process to what we now call comprehensive admissions, or some call holistic admissions, where we looked at a lot of factors that are not race-based factors, but factors that influence learning outcomes, incomes of families, the quality of the high school, the ability, whether you have advanced placement courses available, which will affect your grade point average. And really over a decade of hard work, we've been able to get to a point where the UCLA is much more diverse than it was a decade ago. And we've been fairly successful without using, affirmative action in our decision making. So I think we have been successful. I think we have been fortunate where we are. I think this is not a model that will work for everybody. I believe in affirmative action. I think it should be one factor in admissions with many other factors, but I think it should be a factor. And I worry less for UCLA than the huge impact they'll have nationwide for many campuses that really do have to rely more, I'd say, on affirmative action criteria to make sure that their classroom is diverse and the students benefit from a diverse learning environment, which I think we all see, those of us that live in this environment, see the great benefits of having a diverse student body.
So Barbara Snyder, your organization represents 64, I think, or 66 campuses in this country and in Canada as well. What's your take on that? And do you think that UCLA will be lucky by comparison to others?
I think UCLA has been lucky in comparison to others who haven't had the sterling reputation and the ability to draw from a population in the area in which it sits that's pretty diverse. A number of our campuses are actually not in urban areas. Some are, like UCLA, but some are in more rural environments where, say, a flagship university in a particular state might be in a small college town, and in a state sometimes that doesn't have as much diversity in a variety of ways. And so for those institutions, the ability to be able to use a holistic admissions approach to bringing diverse people to the campus is hugely beneficial. In some ways, it does bring the world to the campus. And I continue to believe that it's really important. I believed it when I was a college president, and I believe it still as president of the AAU. And so we will be supporting our member institutions who will be asking the Supreme Court to continue their ability to be able to use this as one among many strategies in recruiting a diverse student population to their campuses.
All those who study or many of those who study the US Supreme Court say that it is not very likely that it's going to go your way. Do you, pardon me, do you think your institutions are prepared for a very different kind of decision from the one you want to see?
I think they are realistic about the possibility. Obviously, the Supreme Court's decision to take these cases when there was not a split in the circuits does not necessarily bode well, as you say, for the potential outcome. But I also believe that the cases they present will be strong. So I'm still holding out a lot of hope. On the other hand, I think, as you say, it's good to be prepared. And one of the things that I think our campuses can do is learn from the strategies that those who've had to do it, and a number of our public universities have operated in states like California and have been able over time to come up with additional strategies that help them achieve that diversity. And I think we will be learning from campuses like UCLA and sharing that with our other campuses who haven't had to do that yet, but may have to do it depending on what the US Supreme Court decides.
President Starr at Pomona, there is a lack of trust in expertise and authority currently in the United States, and it's beyond the healthy skepticism that we want to see as part of a democracy. There's a resentment, I think, against elite institutions. All of your institutions, I think, can be called that. Have those institutions, including yours, been responsible in some ways for that happening over time?
There's long been an anti-elite strain in the United States of America, going back certainly since our founding. And it's been a kind of political play since the very initial parties of the United States, that one positions itself as the party of the people, while the other is not. I think what we're seeing here that's different now is I've been living in a scarcity culture. I think we all have been living in a scarcity culture in the United States since at least the 1970s. The perceived scarcity is was historically far less than actual scarcity. However, right now, we live in a world in which those two, the perceived scarcity and the actual scarcity, are coming closer together. And we see that with immense income disparities. The additional challenge is that whether or not they are elites, the entrenched interests of the United States of America do not necessarily wish to see any changes to the governed. And there has been a systematic attempt to remove possibilities of education from everyday Americans and their lives. Now, as people are beginning to notice that, it's convenient to blame the educational institutions themselves for that lack. But I think it's clear that there is a failure of fit between the reality of the tens of thousands of students at Chancellor Bloch's institution, or the many students in the AANU, and the work that we all do to bring education to the masses. So what we need to do now is to show people what the value is of obtaining an education, which isn't becoming a member of the elite. It's things like being able to help clean water, go to Flint, Michigan, by doing the research that uncovers the poisoning. It's about being able to understand how COVID is passed from individual to individual and to intervene successfully in it. It's the real benefits that education brings, and we need to keep showing that to individuals. I think there's always more that we can do, but we have unfortunately allowed a narrative that education equals elitism to take hold.
Chancellor Bloch, there has been nationwide an increase in various forms of racism. One of them is anti-Semitism. Have you seen that at UCLA?
Certainly, we've had examples of anti-Semitism. I would say primarily what we have seen is anti-Zionism and really debate on campus about about Israel, and some of that can be certainly touch on anti-Semitism. This is always a difficult discussion with our students about what's legitimate discourse. We can disagree about a country's policies, but to single out one country or to question its legitimacy of its origins when it's been around for decades is something highly hurtful to many of our students who support Israel, but also unfair. And so it's a constant challenge. It's not been the major issue that we faced over the last. Perhaps COVID has just obscured every issue on campus to some extent. But I think on many American campuses, it's certainly an area that's quite hurtful to some of us, a painful discussion for some of our students, and have the ability to talk across differences in a respectful way and to keep the discussions about policy and not about areas of personal beliefs and in inappropriate areas has been a challenge, certainly.
President Snyder, I read in Harper's Index recently that the portion of college graduates projected to need at least 20 years to recoup their tuition costs is 1 in 4, and that the portion of those who will never recoup the total is 3 out of 5. How has that happened, particularly when it's my understanding that the return on invested endowments has gone up? And colleges have more money than they have in the past.
I think that you're seeing more and more of our universities and colleges, not just AAU members, but all over, invest more in financial aid to support students, in addition to working hard to do things like ask Congress to increase the value of a Pell Grant, which is the grant that goes to the lowest income students in our country and has long been a great way to help students from those low and middle income backgrounds get to college and succeed in college and keep their debt burden low. Many campuses are trying to do things like make sure that students who come from low and middle income backgrounds don't leave college with debt burdens. And I think that's happening more and more. But I also think that it's a challenge. It's not going to be solved overnight. And we have to continue to talk about, as President Starr said, the value of a higher education. And I think the data are still clear that students who have a college degree earn more income over their lifetime and are much less likely to be unemployed. And that continues if you go on and get graduate degrees and professional degrees too. So I still think the value is there, but we haven't done as good a job of making that clear. And we also have to continue to reduce the burden on students and families to help pay for it, because having well-educated citizens is a good thing for everybody. And that, of course, is one of the things that underlies public higher education.
President Starr, the global digital knowledge economy is a change agent to a great extent. And there are those who are saying that it's going to change higher education, particularly because people will have more choices, institutions consequently will have less power. Degrees with lasting credibility might be less important than just-in-time type education. And of course, everybody's got a computer now, and they don't have to go on campus, as we've already heard. How soon are these changes? Are these changes taking place as we speak, I guess I should say? And how revolutionary are they going to be?
The reports of the demise of higher education have been greatly exaggerated. And I think that Dewey still isn't president. Ultimately, the first great revolution in higher education was the invention of the lecture in the 1900s, and the textbooks soon after that. And people said, well, once you have textbooks, no one's ever going to go to a lecture again. And that turned out not to be the case. It's always good when people have more choices. And one of the strengths of US higher education is that there are so many different kinds of institutions and people have a huge range of needs for learning. And there will be more just-in-time delivery of education. Companies used to do that themselves. And now it's going to be different kinds of, employers used to do that themselves. And now it'll be different kinds of providers. But that's not going to replace the developmentally necessary intervention in the lives of young adults to help them to master the vast history of humankind and to situate themselves in regard to building a future of it. And so as long as there are young people, there will be higher education in some ways as we know it. And as long as there are young people, there will be people who are telling Socrates and his brethren that we're doing it all wrong.
Chancellor Bloch, to what extent do you think that the changes I mentioned, which it seems to me are inevitable, are going to make campuses themselves less necessary than they are now?
So, I think again, I would echo what President Starr said. I think campuses are here to stay. The residential experience goes way beyond what goes on in the classroom. And that brings up a concern I have that I've written about without much attention. So I must say it's not a popular concept. I call the reverse digital divide. And what my concern is as we close the digital divide, there's a risk that low-income families will tell their children, stay at home. You get a perfectly good degree from a university at home. No reason to spend all that money going to live on campus and experience all the non-sort of essential, what would be viewed maybe as non-essential components of campus life. I think there's a huge danger. I think we've got to make sure that our campuses continue to be in person, irrespective of your family's economic background. So I think the focus should be, obviously we should offer remote education where appropriate, but we should make sure the resources are there to ensure that every student can have an in-residence experience. I should just add, I've talked to alumni over the years, and I still remember an alumni meeting I had in Seattle where a couple of, I think it was Microsoft executives said, we learned a lot in class at UCLA. Where we really learned was actually leading student groups, being the heads of student groups, learning how to lead people. So I think the outside of classroom experiences on campus are extremely hard to replace. But the thing we have to guard ourselves against is to make sure that all students have an opportunity to do that, unless you can end up with what I'll call a reverse digital divide, where we remove the technological barriers to low-income individuals, but then we divide them along these lines.
President Snyder, you made the distinction earlier between campuses that are located in metropolitan areas and those that are in more remote places. Are these changes different in each of those kinds of environments?
I think the opportunity to be on campus is important wherever you are. And I could not agree more with what both President Starr and Chancellor Bloch said about the value of out of the classroom learning too. One of the things that people said as we got better and better at digital is that you wouldn't need campuses, as your question was hypothesizing. And of course, you could imagine a world where there was, we had the greatest expert in a certain part of American history. And so only one person in the whole country teaches all of those courses and does it digitally. Students don't want that. They want to be able to get to know the faculty members. That matters. They develop these mentor-mentee relationships with the faculty who help guide them. They go to office hours. So yes, they learn from leading student organizations and being with peers and living in a residence hall and being a part of student groups, but they also learn in those other settings where they're with graduate students in a laboratory or research assistants for faculty members. So there's just a huge, vast array of opportunities that the online space doesn't allow us to provide. It doesn't mean the online space can't provide a lot of value. It can, but it also means that there are other things that are important. And I agree that it is also really important to make sure that we don't end up with a sort of haves and have-nots divide where the have-nots get the digital education all online and the haves get the residential education. That would be horrible, which is why it's so important for our campuses to continue to make sure that they're recruiting students from everywhere, including from every income category across our country, and of course, globally too, because all of our campuses are very international as well.
I think David Lehrer mentioned at the outset, and I forgot to reinforce the idea that I can get your questions, you people who are in the audience, on my cell phone, if you will relate them to David Lehrer, and he then sends them on to me. And generally speaking, at this hour, it's roughly 40 minutes into the program, we go to your audience questions, and generally speaking, they're a lot better than mine. So let me start there.
Before you get there, Warren, before you get there, can I say one thing to add to the online debate?
Yeah.
So I had a conversation with both of my children, 114, 111, within the last 2 weeks, in which they're feeling incredibly isolated because their father and I are tyrants, and we do not allow them access to social media. It's very real that they feel disenfranchised and isolated. But what we talked about was the fact that when we are interacting like this, we're actually not interacting with each other. We're interacting with a machine. And when we interact with machines, we don't get the immediate feedback that we do from other human beings in so many different dimensions. When we hurt the people with whom we're speaking, we don't always see their pain. We don't see their body change and notice that their eyes are tearing up. And then when someone hurts us, we can hide it for a little while and then read it all night by ourselves without any control, without anyone around us to disrupt it. And fundamentally, this is not healthy. And you can have ersatz relationships online. And we have colleagues who do an incredible job teaching at a distance. But it's not what human beings were evolved to do. And it's not what we've been developed to do. And it's particularly dangerous for those of us who are at vulnerable points in our lives, where we are in fact required to spend time learning how to deal with other people, learning that give and take. And giving that up is going to hurt every single student, and especially hurt those students who are in the age groups that we deal with and those students who are already on the margins, but it'll hurt us all.
That's the neuroscientist in you speaking, but what about the people who, young people particularly, who are on their cell phones all the time, again and again, and certainly they think they have meaningful relationships with the people on the other side, even though, as you indicate, they're interacting with a machine. You're suggesting, like it or not, it's just not the same.
It's not the same. And I would just ask everyone in the audience not to be fooled by the following argument. Social media and these things are not going away. Students have to learn how to deal with them. And therefore, we need to let them play with them to learn. My daughter is cars aren't going away, but my 14-year-old is not going to get behind the wheel. Neither is my 11-year-old. And she said to me just last night, she said, "Mommy, it's really hard to talk to people." And I said, "Yeah, it is. And you have to learn it. And we've all been shoved into a box for the last 2 years. And now you're out of it. Don't put yourself back in, and tell your friends that it's hard, but you'd rather see them face to face. And even if you're just being quiet, it's going to be better than any interaction that you have with your thumbs."
Well, thank you so much for that. Let me then go, as I indicated, to the questions that have come in from people in the audience. And well, here's one that goes right to the issue of money. Alan says, he attended UCLA in the 1960s. He said it was essentially free. Why has the expense of an education gone through the roof? What has increased costs so geometrically? We've talked about that a bit, but he wants to hear more.
Yeah, so certainly costs have increased. We all recognize that. Every aspect of certainly our labor costs have increased. The level of services we provide at the institution actually are considerably greater than we provided in the 60s. But probably the largest factor is state disinvestment for decades in the UC system. So at one time, UC was reasonable, in part because the state provided really an extraordinary amount of support. I mean, the UC system is sort of one of the great educational constructions in the world, and it was done with the great vision and support of the taxpayers of California. And for a long time, essentially, the state really paid the way, essentially with small amounts of contributions from students or their parents. That has now changed. Now we look to the student to provide a much larger share of their educational costs. And it's just simply flip-flopped. At one time, state contributions were large, and now state contributions are more modest. That said, I really I'm deeply appreciative to our governor the last couple of years when the economy has been stronger. There's been reinvestment in the UC system and the CSU, and we're really deeply appreciative that the state again realizes the value of these institutions. But the short answer is there has been a significant reduction in the investment by the state. The costs have gone up. Our faculty salaries have certainly gone up much higher. Facilities are much more extensive now, and I'd say all that together makes for a more expensive education. But still, as a state institution, I think we are still within reason. I think half of our students have no debt, and the average debt per student still remains fairly modest compared to many other institutions. So I think UC still remains a bargain, but not the bargain it was 30, 40 years ago.
Now, President Snyder, here's a question that goes somewhat contrary to what we just heard from President Starr. And it's this, Stephen asks, it's Amy. Pardon me. Amy says, I teach at a medical school and find that many students are demanding online lectures and avoiding classes. Has that been the case, do you think, in a lot of institutions?
Yeah, I think we've seen mostly the opposite. If students want online lectures, it's often because what they really want to do is interact with faculty, not in a lecture format. Because let's face it, a lecture with 100 or 200 students in an auditorium, you can watch that online. And you can probably get about as much out of it as you can when you go in person. So that is maybe not the best example. But if you want to stay and talk to that professor after class, or if you have opportunities to engage with that professor in different ways, I think that's really important. Medical school is a great example of the mentoring relationships that develop, because while they do have lecture formats, an awful lot of the learning in medical school actually happens in clinical settings, where they're being taught by professors who are also clinicians, and students are learning in a very hands-on way, which personally, as a consumer of healthcare, I want to know that my physician has practiced the thing that person is going to be doing before they get to me as the patient. I think patients generally want that as well. So I think that's just one example, and it's true across a lot of professional education, that a lot of learning takes place in a clinical setting where the teaching is not in a lecture format. Yes, certain concepts, basic things can be taught in a lecture format, but a lot of the learning is hands-on, and a lot of it in medical school is actually with real patients who agree to be part of a teaching hospital or a teaching clinical setting, a teaching doctor's office, and appreciate the value that brings to them as patients.
Well, thank you for that. I just have to make a personal note, which is, as a person who's been a patient from time to time, I like the idea of a doctor who has had his hands on or her hands on, and who knows what somebody's body is all about from a very intimate standpoint. President Starr, let me ask you what we heard from Steve. I started to give Stephen's question, and his is, how do you encourage students to leave their political silos as part of their education?
I think the best way is for them to play a game of rugby. I, I say that jokingly. I will say I was a
The Reds
rugby
and the
player.
Blues.
Well, when I joined a women's rugby football club when I was in college, and the ad was the poster said for girls who like to rip the heads off of their Barbie dolls. I met people I would never have run across in my classes, people who were incredibly different from me. This was the first time as a straight woman, I was a minority. I was largely had gay women on my team. And it was a completely wonderful and revelatory experience for me to live in a world in which being a lesbian was normal and normalized. This was in the early 90s when it wasn't that way, certainly in Georgia and North Florida, where I grew up. And this is, again, what Chancellor Bloch and President Snyder are saying. Things happen on campus that bring people together in surprising ways. And everything that individuals can do, students and institutions can do to encourage that kind of mixing is all to the good. And building on something that President Snyder said about the need to bring people of all income levels and all regions of our country together, that's going to be crucial, because you're going to be around people who weren't raised like you, who don't look like you. And you'll be surprised at some point by how much you like them and rely on them when you're in a team with them, or doing a play with them, or in an orchestra with them, because whatever mistake they make or you make, someone has to pick up the ball. And you'll win a game or you'll lose a game, you'll hit a sour note, but the orchestra goes on. And when you have that kind of reliance on another human being, you will learn to treat them as a human being first. And again, it's not about enemies. It's about people.
President Snyder, David Lehrer tells me that several questioners, probably no surprise in this audience, want to know more about anti-Semitism on campuses other than UCLA.
So I think Chancellor Bloch said it really well. It is continuing, as it is not just on campuses, but in our country and in our world. We see a rise in anti-Semitism and other forms of racism too. We've seen anti-Asian bias. Obviously, we've seen the rise of Black Lives Matter in response to racism in other parts of our world and our country for sure. So I think this is an issue that all of our campuses face, because all of our country and all of our world is facing it too. And I think as educational institutions, we have a special responsibility and a special opportunity to try to help students understand those situations and respond to them. I was on a campus that several years ago had, as a number of campuses did across the country, these white nationalist posters. They were racist in a variety of ways, including anti-Semitic. And it was obviously a very difficult moment for those campuses that had to deal with those things. That continues to go on in some ways across our campus, but we also have great examples of tremendous dialogue. Our faculty often model that, and we hope that they always do. And we also are seeing it among student groups who have shown a great capacity for having dialogue, respectful dialogue, and learning from each other. And Chancellor Bloch raised the question of the issue of anti-Semitism versus anti-Zionism, and the line that one walks in dealing with those issues. As someone who was on a campus where there was strong support for the state of Israel and many celebrations of anniversaries and other things around the founding of the state of Israel, it also was a campus where there were students who felt differently about Israel and what it is doing today and wanted to be able to criticize it. And as it happens in Israel, since I visited a number of times, I know there is criticism for the state of Israel within Israel, just as there is in our country for things that our governments do at the national, state, and local levels. So trying to make sure that that dialogue happens respectfully and that it is not based on racism, on prejudice, on bias, on these sort of malign intentions, but based on legitimate opportunities to discuss and debate. That's really important. And lots of opportunities to talk about things that are uncomfortable too. That's hallmark of what our campuses do, whether you're a liberal arts college or a research university, a community college. All of our campuses are engaged in the opportunity for students to learn, engage in respectful dialogue, learn from each other, and learn from experts as well. That's what we're here for.
Chancellor Bloch, one listener or viewer wants to know, what are your thoughts about free community college education?
Personally, I'm not sure I'm a fan of free community college education. I'm much more in favor of making sure that there's adequate resources, whether it's community college or four-year institutions, that there's adequate financial support for students that need it. That's my sense. I think we have to be really concerned that there are many students, especially, there are students who need support and there's students who need less support. And I think probably I would rather direct the resources to the most financially needy students, irrespective of whether it's community college or a four-year institution. Although I am an enormous fan of community colleges, a third of our students are transfers. A lot of people don't recognize that about UCLA. We are a huge center for transfer students, and they do wonderfully when they come to UCLA. So I certainly believe in it, but I think that in terms of financial support, I'd rather see it simply go to the most financially needy students.
Warren, if I could
Very quickly, I
interject.
think this will be the last question we have time for. Sue asks this: research suggests that a quality high school education is a necessary ingredient for college success. What can you do, or what can you, presumably means collectively, do to impact high school curricula and teaching, especially reports of people fleeing teaching in droves?
Is that for anybody, Warren?
That
Or
was for President Starr, excuse me.
oh, sorry.
So I think that right now there's a crisis in respect for our teachers. And again, that goes to a lack of funding, but it also has to do with the fact that many of our teachers are being asked to do a heck of a lot more than teach. They're asked to be guidance counselors. They're asked to enforce discipline, COVID discipline. They're asked to be mental health counselors. They're asked to do everything other than stand in front of their students as a human being and help them to learn. So the first thing that we have to do is, as citizens, make demand of our government that teachers get strong pay. We also have to, I believe, support the right of teachers to have governance of their own classrooms so that they can teach the students they know well what they need them to learn and how, and restore again some of the excitement to teaching and not teaching to a test. Ultimately, for individuals, parents, students, families, guardians, it's going to be nurturing your kids' curiosity. And whatever way you can nurture their curiosity, that will help them to soar. Take them to a library, help them find a book. If it's a game that they enjoy playing, they're addicted to one of my kids about killing everyone on the planet with a disease that it hides in the bushes. Let them play it. Find the next thing. Let them learn about genes and evolution and spark that desire. Stop pressing the rules and start finding what people love. Because human passion is what's always driven human discovery. And if we can support that, we'll be in a good place.
We're essentially out of time. Let me ask you all, if you will, 10 or 15 seconds, a final word that you would like people to remember. President Snyder, we'll start with you.
I'm going to mention two quick things. One is that if the Pell Grant were doubled, as we've been urging, community college would be free, and it would go a long way toward defraying tuition at all kinds of institutions for low-income students. So write your congressperson about that. And second is just to tell you that in the world of anti-intellectualism that we face right now, one of the things that we've seen come out of COVID, one of the good things, is this desire to have accurate information. And therefore you see experts on the news every single day from our universities talking about giving advice, what people should do, the public health situation. And I think that shows that people really do value expertise and experience, and it takes a pandemic to show that.
Barbara Snyder, president of the Association of American Universities. Gabrielle Starr, president of Pomona College. Quickie from you.
Sometimes it looks like everything in the world is burning down, and that we've got generational conflict that's going to end the planet as we know it. I think that generational conflict is in part about a fear that we're going to be replaced. But higher education is about a joyous hope that the generation that comes after us will do it better than we are doing it now. And so it's our job to foster generational conflict so that human beings can be better the next time around.
Gene Bloch, Chancellor, UCLA, final word.
I would just say that, you know, California has always been sort of the leading edge for change, and the demographics of California are probably changing more quickly than any other state. And I think it leaves me optimistic. I just see spectacular students from backgrounds that we would not have seen a decade ago at our campus, and adding in immeasurable ways, dedicated and smart in what they're doing. So I'm an optimist. I just think we are doing a great job, and, you know, go California.
Well, thank you all. It's been a great opportunity for me. I want to go back to school. Great to have you all on, and thanks very much for doing it. Next week, next Wednesday, I should say, Bill Kristol and Ron Brownstein. Bill Kristol, editor of The Bulwark, and Ron Brownstein, of course, CNN and The Atlantic, are going to be talking about the political scene and what lies ahead. So join us if you will, or join them, I should say. And thanks a lot for being with us tonight.